Namaste. You're listening to shravaNa, the Rashtram podcast, brought to you by Rashtram School of Public Leadership. And on this episode of shravaNa, we bring you Sri Brannon and Dr. Nagaraj Paturi discussing Vedic knowledge and global Indigenous Resurgence, the journey of an American Dharmic Activist. Stay tuned.
Namaste, Brannon ji. We want to have your views about your wonderful perspective of what is generally called as Hinduism is a culture which is globally useful, globally relevant, and how you, with that perspective, got into that kind of a tradition and culture. What actually motivated you to get into that culture, and what are your perspectives about the living nature of this culture and its global relevance, etc.?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Nagaraj ji. I'm honored to be here. And in answer to your questions, I definitely have quite a unique background and perspective into Hinduism. When I was 3 years old, my mother and father, at the time, we were living in Hawaii, and basically my mother just happened to see a business card. I think someone gave it to her at the beach or something, and it said, learn about yoga, learn about the Bhagavad Gita, like this. And at the time, my parents had bought this album. I think it was called Krishna Meditations or Happening or something. And it was a recording of Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada that had been done by some of his disciples in the mid-60s in New York City. And it had spread all over, at the time, the hippie movement was going on. And it was a huge hit amongst the hippies, especially after the Beatles and George Harrison got involved. And he put out that song, My Sweet Lord, which is still one of the top biggest hits in the history of rock and roll music. And so then my mother saw the card, and then she went to this yoga center. And 3 days before my mom had visited, the leader of the yoga center had met A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada and become his disciple. And this young man, he was like a popular leader in Hawaii, and he had hundreds, if not thousands, of followers. And he immediately had all of them join Prabhupada's movement, and his name is Chris Butler, and he's Tulsi Gabbard's guru. And so our family also came through, quote unquote, Hinduism through this path. And then at the time, the Krishna movement was kind of young, so they had a rule that anyone who joins with kids needs to go join in their home birth town, so that if there's some issues or whatever, they'll have their local family to back them up. And so we ended up moving to Atlanta. That's where I'm from originally. And coincidentally, my cousin, he was the mayor of Atlanta at the time, and the devotees were being arrested left and right for doing Harinam in the streets and quote unquote harassing people. So then after my mother, she got arrested, and then her brother told our cousin. So then he issued a proclamation and said, no one is to disturb God's people doing God's work in this city of Atlanta while I'm mayor, like that. So basically by then I was 4 years old. And then I got sent to the first ISKCON Gurukul in Dallas. I was the third student there. And this was 1971, a long time ago, I guess, for some people. And I basically, from then on, from 4 years old, I lived in that school without my parents as a young brahmachari student, studying Vedic literature, waking up every morning from Mangal Arti at 4 a.m. And that was my life for 10 years, from 4 years old to 14 years old. And I spent the last a good almost 3 years of that in Vrindavan, India, in the Gurukul there. And there's a lot of interesting, and that's actually where I would say my real background into traditional indigenous Hindu culture and civilization and ethos and morals and understanding of what it is to be a Hindu in the modern world today. And how that came about is because, as you know, Prabhupada, he had to come to the West, and all his initial followers were Westerners. And despite their sincerity, they had no cultural background or training. And so Prabhupada had a friend from before he'd gone to the West from Agra named Dr. Sharma, and they owned some hotel in Agra. And so Dr. Sharma, he was a traditional Hindu, but he wasn't like an official member of the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition or the Nimbarka Vaishnava tradition. He was more a scholarly, he was a teacher, and his family owned a hotel. So Prabhupada demanded, he said, I want him to be the principal of my Gurukul. And the other younger followers like, yeah, but he's not even a follower of yours. And what will he teach these boys? And he said, he will teach these boys true culture, right? And immediately, even as a 9-year-old kid, I understood what he meant by that, because here was Dr. Sharma, right? He wasn't an initiate. He wasn't what do you call it, a shaved up Sika Gaudiya Vaishnava practicing individual, but still Prabhupada demanded that he be put in charge of our training and our upbringing, right? And it was Dr. Sharma who pointed me in this direction, taught me about Rani of Jhansi, taught me about Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, taught me about the great King Shivaji, the Maratha Empire, the reconquest of India, all these historical facts that are not even denied, they're just ignored, so that was my opening to all this. And I was going, even from a mundane level, this is incredible stories, informations, even if it was all fiction. I'm not even talking about all the Vedic literature. I'm just talking about the Maratha Empire, right? It's almost been erased from the public consciousness of the historians of the world and the historical researchers of the world. And so that was my first wake-up call. I'm like, these are incredible stories. Netaji's story, incredible. Rani of Jhansi's story, incredible. I mean, now some films have been made, but I'm talking late 70s. I'm like, why doesn't anyone know about these incredible people? And it doesn't matter if they were like Indians or Africans or Europeans. When someone has an incredible legacy, an incredible history, incredible story, that's for all humanity to be inspired by, right? So that was a real opening. And then my other big opening to this civilization was also when I was 9 years old in Vrindavan. And at the time, like Nagaraj ji, you probably remember the economic conditions of India compared to today. And so for us in Vrindavan, like getting some cows was not an easy thing back then. And so we actually had to track down some cows, and I got to pick out the first 2 cows for the Vrindavan ISKCON Gaushala, which is one of the biggest in the region from from my understanding. And I was actually able to pick out the first 2 cows, and every day I'd go milk the cows. And then even now I hear all this vegan nonsense propaganda, like cows are not your mother, cow milk is for the calf. It's all crap, because when I was a 9-year-old, 10-year-old kid, every day I would be taking care of the milk cows. We had the 2, and I'm not exaggerating. That mom would push her calf away to make room for me to take care of her and milk her, and it was a great experience. And so from then, about 14 years old, after Prabhupada left, and ISKCON kind of had definitely had some issues. And I basically was 14, and I'm just like, wow, I've been like deep immersed 10 years in this traditional culture, and I'm in a white American body, and I don't know anything about my home country. So at 14, I actually ran away from New Vrindavan in West Virginia to go live with my grandma in Atlanta, Georgia. And I was there for a few months. And then again, I just started seeing right away when I went to junior high school, the lack of culture and the foul language and the lack of focus and the lack of cohesive sense of tradition around me. And then there were like the religious people but then they were just so hardcore Christian or Jewish or whatever they're into. And I just wanted some happy medium. And so I started noticing right away that my upbringing taught me to feel empathy for others' suffering, to care about the impact of my actions upon others. And suddenly I was in junior high in America, and it was the exact opposite. I would notice someone would fall over in the hallway, and people, instead of, oh my God, are you okay? They'd be like, ah, look at that idiot. And people taking pleasure in other people's suffering. And that blew my mind right away, you know. And then I remember I was walking, and I'd have, you know, people call me, oh, the crazy Indian, like that, you know. And yeah, and so then I was just walking, and then this black kid comes up, and he's like, hey man, where's your girlfriend? And I'm just like, you know, my upbringing was like, Mata Ji, you know, Devi, Radharani, just worshipable. And I'm like, girlfriend? And I'm like, only 14. He's like, yeah, man, where's your girlfriend? And I'm like, I don't have a girlfriend. And then he said, oh, and he used that derogatory term for homosexuals, right? And in my upbringing, the worst words we used were like fool and rascal. And this guy called me that, and I just jumped on him, you know, because in India, you know, it's like Hindus are supposedly peaceful, but I've seen some of the biggest fighters in India, especially those coward boys with their sticks, man. So we had a fighting tradition. As soon as that guy called me a bad word, I just jumped on him, started beating him. And then they took me to the office, and I told them, this is, why are you fighting? And I told them. So we both got suspended for a few days. And then a few days later, I was walking, and the same black kid with all his crew saw me. And they're like, hey, there's the wild Indian. They're like, man, we love you. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. So that was my first introduction to American culture. And then a few years later, I went to college, and I specifically chose a professor named Professor Krishna. And when I started the course, it was an Indian lady professor. And at first, things were great. You know, I felt someone had a good rapport with my teacher. And then when we got to Hinduism in our history studies, literally they had a mullah as a picture, and they'd say, here's a Brahmin. And then they would have quotes they'd have quotes from the wrong scriptures saying this. And of course, they would hammer the Manu Samhita, like, you know, and I mean, I've heard of the Manu Samhita, but I don't think Manu Samhita is at the center of any modern traditional Hindu sampradayas. But if you study,
You're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
But if you study mainstream academic, they make the Manu Samhita as if it's the go-to Bible and how-to book to be a Hindu, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just like, man,
actually,
and then I went to my...
Historically, that book was actually dug out by the British for the sake of creating a Hindu law, because they were already creating an Islamic law. They wanted to control the legal aspects of Muslims in India. So they went in search of a book, and they found this one particular book, which is one among many such Smriti books, and they dug it out. And it is they who created such a hype about the centrality of this book, which was never existing in the history of India.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I knew that intuitively, but then the way it was presented in such an imbalanced way, you know, and it's like I could take any law. It's like, let's take the laws of England from 200 years ago, and you could kill anyone for anything, you know. And so that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it's like a common technique to take a snapshot of a culture from, you know, an ancient time or a time of imbalance or a time of crisis, and then present that as the normal face of that tradition, and then use it as a way to whittle away the confidence in that tradition amongst the people of that tradition, you know. And it's like, and what really hits me, so anyway, just back to my brief biography. So when I saw this to my professor, I showed her the mistakes in the textbook, and she was she wasn't like this rabid Marxist type either. And I didn't know her personally. I don't know like if she was a practicing Hindu, but I just pointed. I said, "Look, that's wrong, and that's wrong." And she looks at me, says, "I know." And I just looked at her and I says, "I have a question. Will I be graded on what the facts are based on my experience in Hindu culture, or based on what is in the textbook?" And she said, "You'll be graded by what's in the textbook." And that was the end of my Western education and the beginning of my research into Hindu civilization and Vedic histories. And then that was 95. And then 1996, I saw an ad in the back of a magazine. And I think it was Hinduism Today. And so there was a big Vedic conference being held in Atlanta, Georgia, in my hometown. So then I just presented my paper and they accepted it. And I made it all the way to Atlanta, Georgia, and connected with David Frawley and Dr. Chandora and Dr. Subhash Kak and Conrad Elst and Judah Carmel, Michael Cremo, met all these, and Sadaputa. And I was able to actually make a brief video, like way before. This is 96. I made a video and put it on public access. Anyway, and that was the beginning of my quote unquote career in this field. And it just blew my mind because I was surrounded by big scholars like yourself, professors, PhDs. And I just humbly came and I didn't come with a paper like, this is what's up. I just said, these are key questions that are being ignored and not answered properly in the study of Indian history. And my paper was a big hit, and it just boosted my confidence to be like, wow, if all these big scholars and professors recognize my work as legit, then I'm really onto something. And that's all the validation I needed. And so since then, it's been about a 25-year journey, and there's so much I got involved with through then. But that was definitely my initial igniting, my ignition into this Vedic historical research. So.
Oh, yeah. So then you seem to have moved out of the general ISKCON type of trend, and you seem to be talking about indigenous cultures in general and their global relevance and these things which generally are not usually ISKCON type of approach. Do you agree that this is a little different from a general ISKCON type of approach?
Yeah, there's a huge disconnect between a majority of ISKCON and ISKCON branches. You know, like Gaudiya Math has many followers now. Let's just say ISKCON umbrella. Yeah, there's a huge disconnect, and a lot of them are also victims of misinformation and disinformation about India. And one of the main reasons they're always using the media in a weaponized fashion to discredit India is to disconnect people like us, like me, from you, right? They don't want that connectivity going on. And so like I had to leave Facebook again, just because you see so many people who they'll post beautiful pictures of cows in India and the holy places and murtis and all that. And as soon as you mention, you know, the indigenous struggle, they'll like attack it as if it's part of the problem. And so I mean, sadly, I think a majority of them are uninformed. But whether you're uninformed or not, if you are siphoning some benefit from anything, from a person, or like, let's say there's my neighbor has a gas tank and I'm like siphoning it and using it for my own self without giving him any credit, that's what they're doing, you know? They're not recognizing, and to backtrack a little bit with Dr. Sharma and Prabhupada, what I learned was that in the bedrock, in the foundation of ISKCON, the foundation and bedrock of ISKCON, I mean, is India, is Indian civilization, Hindu culture. And so like again and again, I remember one time when Prabhupada was in Vrindavan and someone told him, they're like, oh, President Jimmy Carter's sister is going to visit India. And Prabhupada was like, oh, wow. And it was just like there was no spiritual pilgrimage. But he's like, oh, I can't remember the exact words, but he directly said, oh, no, this is so important because when they recognize the value of Indian civilization, they will recognize the value of our work, right? And so
Mm.
Prabhupada, and for example, can you name one project Srila Prabhupada did outside of India? I mean, big building project like Vrindavan, Mumbai, Delhi, Navadvip, Mayapur, right? Because his focus was India is the power center, recharge that power center, then the whole world will be surcharged spiritually and culturally, right? And I saw that right away, and I've taken that lesson from me in my heart from the very beginning. And so, yeah, it's a huge challenge, and it's not a new challenge because I don't know if you're familiar with American history, but there's one great American Indian leader named Tecumseh, and he was like he represented the last chance the Native Americans had to maintain their own independent nation, pretty much. And so who were his biggest obstacles were his own people, right? And so it's the same story happening in India right now. And so that's been my big thing, is pointing out to anyone who will listen that ISKCON is a branch of this ancient Vedic civilization. And without the homeland of India, then at best we would become a withered branch on that tree. And so, yeah, it's an important thing. And ironically, even though I'm disconnected in ISKCON in terms like I don't go and do ISKCON preaching programs, but I'm actually living here on an ISKCON farm, Goloka farm it's called. And Hari Vilas Maharaj, well, it's actually his private property, and I stay here, and we have like 9 Desi cows and like pure breeds from India, and we have goats, and Microsoft is here in the same town, Microsoft headquarters. So a lot of Hindu Microsoft workers come and do Go Puja, and then they're building a Desi Indian vegetable garden, like I can look at it right out my window. And so in a sense, I'm more involved with ISKCON, but Prabhupada's vision of ISKCON, where we don't disconnect with our indigenous foundation, where we're fully integrated with it here, right? And so it's funny, I would say since my time as a child in Vrindavan, this is the most integrated I've been with Hindu civilization on a day-to-day basis. Or even like last month, the Washington state government was here, and they chose in the whole state of Washington only 9 places to highlight for the state Washington official spring festival. And so, yeah, and we have, before Corona, of course, we'd have big festivals with thousands of attendees. And then post-Corona, things are actually better in a way, not in terms of attendees, but in terms of people involved, like people who come. Like the other day, someone just gave Maharaj $1,000. She was so impressed with this cow program here. So yeah, so I'm definitely more integrated with your culture and civilization than ever before. And this aspect of being publicly advocating it, I took a 5-year break, and I'm hoping now with my website, I'm rescuing my 25 years of work and putting it in an easily accessible, readable format. And then now doing interviews like this with your good self. And I hope we can start a new phase where, I can be of service to your great culture and community.
Yeah, that your perspective about the living nature of this culture, that's actually that every time catches my attention. Most of the research on India and Indian civilization has been textual. People have always been around texts and books all the time. But you are a traveler. You traveled a lot in India, and for you, it is all living.
Exactly, living and tangible and real. And it's not like a hobby, like some people, they'll take it up, especially in the 90s, as people wearing bindi dots and henna and like, ooh, it's my latest phase or whatever, which we should encourage anyway, because that's the beauty of this culture, is anything they're attracted to, You pull them in, and then they suddenly see the bounty of what they were attracted to was just a mere reflection, a spark of the splendor of the magnificence of what is Hindu civilization. Oh, and one thing I wanted to bring up related to ISKCON and Hinduism, and by my Guru Dev's grace, thank you for everything, Prabhupada. I can remember things a lot better as a child and my time with Prabhupada than I can remember last week. It's funny. So one thing I remember in 1976, you could look it up, anyone interested, ISKCON was being sued big time as a brainwashing, dangerous cult. And people, even one of my Gurukul teachers was kidnapped. It was legal to kidnap people to save them from this dangerous cult. And there was this guy, Ted Patrick, and he used to go and he kidnapped my teacher, and they would trap him in rooms and try and force him to look at Playboy magazines and drink alcohol and eat meat and get back to being a normal, good old American. Wake up, type of thing. And so, anyway, and it culminated in this huge landmark lawsuit, and ISKCON was going to be condemned and basically outlawed. And all these big scholars and professors came to ISKCON's defense, and they said, no, ISKCON is a legitimate branch of the ancient Hindu civilization and world recognized religion. And immediately when the scholars said this, the court immediately declared ISKCON is a legitimate branch of the Hindu tradition and is all full legal protections given to any other religion in this country. And so immediately ISKCON has been safe from harassment since 1976, legal harassment, based on its connection to the Hindu civilization and religion, right? And then again, when the Bhaktivedanta Manor was being harassed legally, again, how did they win the case? By being recognized an official branch of the legitimate Hindu religion, right? So every time the battle is there, ISKCON will win the victory, allying with our Hindu brothers and sisters. So that's real important to me because courtrooms are so important because they only deal with facts. An uncorrupted courtroom will only deal with the facts, make a decision based on facts. And so anyone wants to question the legitimacy and the value of Hinduism, look at those court cases and you'll understand its value in that sense.
Yeah, and also what happened in history is most of such new movements like the one started by Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada turned into religions by themselves. They turned into independent cults, and some of them started claiming independence from Hinduism also. But the way you are approaching the issue is every time you are connecting back to Hinduism, and you oppose that kind of independence from the main stock of Hinduism.
Yeah, because it's ungratefulness. It's like complete ungratefulness. And then even within the Vaishnav tradition, we have so many stories of people who their path to Vaishnavism didn't start off so well. It wasn't like that auspicious, but always they look back to that initial. I can't even remember the Sanskrit term. Maybe there's a term for that kind of guru who wakes you up. And even though they're not like your traditional guru in the Sampradaya, and I think Krishna in the Bhagavatam in the 11th canto, he's talking with Uddhava, and he says there are 11 gurus. He has 11 gurus or something, and one of them's a parrot. I think one of them's a dog. One of them's a prostitute, right? And so, so it shows you the idea of how the guru energy works and the tradition works. And every time any of these great personalities who became famous later, they'll always look to that initial person who might not even be worshipable or considered a big acharya, but they'll see that person as worshipable for them personally as the person who introduced them to the sacred path they're on. So that's all within the tradition, and that's the thing. And that brings me to another point about the identity and the term Hindu. And as you know, I think over the years, someone did show me a Vedic quote where it had the word Hindu and said it came from a mix of the words Himalaya, Have you ever heard of that theory?
Yeah, it's a little funny. But
No.
you have this perspective that Hinduism is the surviving culture from among many ancient indigenous cultures of the world. So
Yeah.
you have that global perspective of ancient civilizations and ancient
Yeah.
indigenous cultures, and placing Hinduism as one among them, but surviving, the others losing, the others becoming
Well,
extinct.
isn't it a fact it's the only surviving functional indigenous culture in the world? Because, we can go down to New Mexico and find the Hopi tribe, right? But
Mm.
if you look at their day-to-day functionality, I think all of them are surviving, going to Safeway and getting gas and the petrol at the gas station. And whereas if you go to India, I know it's changed recently, but my understanding is a vast majority of the people there are living as they had 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, right? The village culture. Maybe they have a phone, maybe whatever, but in terms of their day-to-day functionality, they have the temple, they have the, what's it called? The village leader, Panchayat, I think. And
Mm-hmm.
and they have they'll still go get water. They'll still,
Mm-hmm.
like, even when I traveled in Arunachal Pradesh, they were showing me directly their agriculture techniques, right? That they were been doing for thousands of years. And then I asked them, I said, well, have any of your people been fooled by like the pharmaceutical, not the pharmaceutical, the fertilizer, uh, what's it called? The big agro companies, they make fertilizer and all this artificial herbicides and all that. And I says, haven't you been approached by them? Haven't you tested any of that? I mean, how did you handle that? I said, basically, we took an acre of land, and for 1 year, we tested it using all these supposedly brand new, amazing technologies. And then we noticed the outcome after a year compared to our natural agricultural techniques. And it was like night or day. One was like struggling, didn't have a natural flow to him, was like we had to keep babysitting it. Whereas the other one, we just did our time as we've done for thousands of years, and the harvest was great. And it was obvious to us which was beneficial. Our traditional ways are beneficial. And so, India, and I know Africa too, they have in it South America. But what I'm saying is those are isolated pockets, whereas India and Nepal and probably Sri Lanka, right? And maybe even Pakistan and Bangladesh, you still have this functioning, thriving civilization to the point where if modern civilization collapsed, the internet, electrical grid, and all that, who would survive would be mostly those people versus all of us modern techies and experts.
Yes,
So
yes.
that's, isn't that proof right there? It's the ancient
Yeah,
indigenous
and
civilization.
one beautiful thing is that even ISKCON people are nowadays moving in that direction, and they are calling their uh, places as eco villages,
Yes,
Vedic eco village.
yes.
In Australia, I found one such Vedic eco village, and they use the word
Oh,
Vedic
wow.
eco village in Mumbai too.
Oh,
Uh,
in Mumbai?
in Mumbai, yes, in Mumbai,
Nice.
they have a Vedic eco village there,
Wow.
and that's a good development within ISKCON, that they are realizing that one of the pulls, one of the attractions for indigenous cultures, basically, is one of the motivating factors towards indigenous cultures is the ecological awareness, environmental awareness.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
is
And the
very
natural inbuilt environmental sustainability and this environmentally friendly practices. Like a lot of indigenous people, if you ask them the technical, scientific aspects of what they're doing, they might not be able to give you all the, information, but they just know what they're doing instinctively, and that needs to be preserved. And that reminds me too, like when I wanted to say about ISKCON, I've noticed over the years, which I think is a positive development, is I think there's a lot of linkage now going on the cultural level, but I think people tend to have a fear of politically empowered people. And so they're all assuming like, oh, if they're president of the United States, then they're one of the bad guys. If they're the prime minister of India, then they're one of the bad guys, you know? And so
Hmm.
there's a lot of trauma and mistrust of leadership, especially with a lot of the breakaway ISKCON groups.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, so it's a huge battle, but I would say, you know, culturally is definitely a lot of linkage going on, which is a good development.
And nowadays there are neo-paganist movements also coming up. Many indigenous cultures asserting themselves and organizing themselves into a larger global group, and they all asserting, as against the global religions, evangelical religions, and other things.
Yeah.
So that's a new culture that is emerging all over the world. Probably Hinduism now has a role to play in organizing all these people. Mm. Because
Yeah.
this has survived. There is no need of revival as is being done in the case of neo-paganist movements and all that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Such an important point. Definitely. We should figure out how to sloganize that, because that's such an important point, you know, that all these other ones are being revived. And this one has survived, you know,
Yes.
and it's thriving actually. And, you know, and a lot of the negativity, it's almost like not almost, you can literally measure the success and the potency of the Hindu civilization based on the amount of animosity and weaponized media thrown at Hinduism in India. It's like the effort. It's like when someone's shining so bright, it's like they need to dull them, or else everyone's going to be attracted to that individual and what they have to offer. You know, so
Yeah.
that's the thing. It's so important because and it brings up another topic um, about the evangelical religions, as you call them, Christianity and Islam. And one thing that my research is not so popular is because my idea is not my idea. What I'm finding and what all the Vedic scriptures say is that this Vedic information is aparashaya, right? Is that how you say it?
Mm. Mm. Yes.
Aparashaya is not from mankind,
Mm.
right? And it's the original template of creation. And if we even look at the language involved, like if we take the English word heart, right, and you look at its etymology, you'll find hrid in Sanskrit, and you boil it down because Hari Daya. I know this is from the Vaishnava perspective, but some scholars have shown that the English word heart is directly descended from the Sanskrit words Hari Daya, or the
Mm.
dais of God,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And so, and then we have the, you know, like Julius Caesar's famous saying, "Veni, vidi, vici," right? I came, I
Mm.
saw, I conquered, and that's pretty much pure Sanskrit, right?
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
like for example, like the obvious ones, vidi, Veda, you know,
Mm.
verify, verification, and then
Mm.
vici, vijay, you know, to conquer, right?
Mm.
And so it's not because I know there's like the idea that we all came from cavemen, and then the Indian people evolved to the highest levels and created Hindu civilization, and then it's the Indo-Europeans spread Sanskrit everywhere. But I'm finding, like, if that's the case, why do we find almost pure Sanskrit in the remotest cultures in the world, like, you know, the Marquesas Islands, the Hawaiian Islands, right? In the Sioux Wakantanka tradition, right? Again and again, you keep finding sacred Vedic elements at the core of all these traditions. And you could have the theory that, you know, Hindu people traveled all over the world and spread that civilization. But I think that it's a combination of both, that the civilization is a natural, organic outcome of creation, right? Because it really came from a divine source, right? And rather than, there's the descending process where we receive information from the higher powers, and there's the modern ascending process, like sending rockets to the moon and trying to figure things out blindly, like, the blind men and the elephant story. And I believe I'm a supporter of a combination of both ancient and modern technologies, and using the ancient technologies as a template, as a guide for healthy scientific research that won't damage humanity or the planet, and but also not falling into the soulless trap, of human based superiority complexes. And then what another thing, this is a whole nother aspect, like, I don't know, History Channel, you have that in India, right? The TV channel. And for years, it was like the go-to channel to watch, like, legitimate, academically accredited documentaries on historic events, personalities. In the past few years, ancient aliens, ancient aliens, ancient aliens, all this pseudoscience. And why they're doing that, in my opinion, is because this Vedic knowledge is so powerful. They're taking our same Vedic knowledge, because we have so much serpent-based worship in our tradition, that they created this whole alien reptilian theory, and millions, if not billions of people now would rather believe in that fake theory than the Vedic evidences. And so my main point I'm getting to is, what is Christianity? What is Islam? What is Judaism? In my view, they are reflections of the ancient original religion of the world, right? And
Yes.
so, so it's not like it's some made up religion. And even Abraham, they say he came from the city of Ur in modern Iraq. And what was the political kingdom in that part of the planet around that time? They were the Hurriya and the Mitanni people. The Mitanni people were Sanskrit speakers, and they worshipped Vedic gods. The Abrahamic religions are also rooted in the Vedic tradition, and where they ran with it is another story.
Yes.
But I'm finding, like, I found a lot of my work all over the internet, and Hindu activists, and I love them, but they completely stripped all Abrahamic connections from my work, because they're afraid it will, like, empower evangelicals and go, look, our religion's the same. You could quit Hinduism and just worship Christ, and I understand that. But we should be very careful not to damage the true template for modern contemporary issues. Like, we have to be obvious. Like, okay, we have to be obvious. Like, hey, Shakuni's a bad guy. We shouldn't trust him and go to this chess game, right, for example, right? We can't just be blind and let bad things happen. But we should also protect the ultimate truth. And so, yes, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, some of the history of religions researchers have even traced some of the early ideas of the Semitic religious tree to Zoroastrianism. They trace it to Zoroastrian ideas traveling to Israel, and Zoroastrianism has connection with Vedic religion. So that way, though
undoubtedly.
yeah,
that and what's interesting is the Yazidi, because I was involved with the Yazidi rescue a few years ago from the terrorists in Iraq, and they basically, I studied their religion. That Yazidi is etymologically directly descended from the word yagya, right? And basically they were the yagya people offering yagya, and they were also directly related to the Zoroastrians. Look, the same thing happened in our country. Even in the name of humanitarian concern, they did more damage, because some American Indians feel that the missionary schools that their kids were forced to go to did more damage to their culture than all the genocide and slaughter and land theft. The most damaging thing was when their kids were forced by law to live in Christian missionary schools and become Christians. And that's what ripped the soul out of their culture. It's like when they had to fight in resistance, it gives you a certain resilience. Even if you're not winning, you feel like, okay, at least I put up a good fight, So, I wanted to read a brief quote from my book. And it pretty much
please go ahead. Yeah, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
It said, this is from my book called The Serpent, the Eagle, the Lion, and the Disc. And these are four emblems which are directly connected to Vishnu. And they are also found at the core of every ancient religious tradition in the world. Not the creator, because there's always Brahma, the creator, is actually lower than the supreme God. So the supreme God in every ancient tradition of the world has four symbols: the serpent, the eagle, the lion, and the disc, right? Ananta Shesha, Garuda. And the lion can be Nrsimha, but also God is time, because Krishna said, when Arjuna asked, "Who are you?" And
Mm.
Krishna said, "Time I am, Kalos me, and I've come to destroy, engage all." I can't remember the exact quote, but basically this idea of God as time, the all-devouring beast, is the lion, the beast. And that's why you'll have like a lot of these, even in Indonesia, they still call them the monster gargoyles. They're called kalamukas, simhamukas, right? And the core um, source of this tradition appears to be when Krishna said, "I am the all-devouring beast of time." And so my thesis is based on the fact that when Krishna and Balaram walked this earth over 5,000 years ago, their heroic activities combined with their pastoral pursuits and their upbringing seized the imagination of one and all. Their advent and their subsequent epical roles ushered in an era of grand momentous events. It represented a paradigm shift within the history of civilization. The impact of Krishna and Balaram on the planet, their activities, and their worship is found at the very foundations of the diverse traditions and cultures across the globe. The entire human civilization, history, and religion of the last 5 millennia are built upon the principles, precedents, ideals, and personalities of these two transcendental brothers. The era of Krishna and Balaram was recognized as the central event in the entire history of the world, and their worship, along with Srimati Radharani and God as time, was 4,000, 5,000 years ago, the primary religion of the entire ancient world. So that's my basic thesis. And you can think about it different ways. Let's think about it from a historical perspective
Yeah.
rather than a religious perspective. So let's say Krishna and Balaram were great, magnificent, heroic personalities, of Indian history, right? And then we could take someone like Alexander the Great, who was over 2,000 years ago, or Jesus Christ, 2,000 years ago, Mohammed, not even 2,000 years ago, and look at the impact on the planet as we're sitting here today. And so I'm saying, go back and turn the clock of time back, as in a time
Mhm.
machine, and go
Mhm.
back to the world of 4,500 years ago, 5,000 years ago, and imagine the impact of these individuals, right? If even 10% of the stories about them are true, that's incredible, for people who have been doing this on the planet, right? And we got to remember also the Middle East area, before the 200-year drought, I think of 3,800 BC, it wasn't as dry. And also the Indian Ocean, currently called the Arabian Sea, the ancients knew those currents like the back of their hand, and there was no difficulty for these cultures and civilizations to interact and share news and share updates about what's going on. And so that's my thesis, that Krishna and Balaram and that whole era, Mahabharata era, was so impactful on the world that all the religions and traditions of the world, of the modern world, are rooted in that. And of course, there's beyond that, past 5,000 years is also there. So,
Yeah,
so
excellent. Actually, wonderful, amazing.
yeah,
Yeah. So, but historians, professional historians may agree or disagree with this kind of a perspective, but this can be called an itihasa perspective. In the
mm,
itihasa perspective, we don't have this hard history research, a logical positivist history research, and all that. So. There is a different time to which it need not necessarily be historical time,
mm,
but they, Krishna and Balrama or realities of probably a different kind. but definitely they had an impact on the entire globe.
Yeah, that's what I see.
And,
No, and then what gets me is like, let's take ancient Crete, for example. And now they've been saying linear A, they can't translate it. But one professor, Owen, has dedicated his life to it. He's like one of the world's leading experts on linear A. He's
mm,
straight up been saying for years now, this is a form of Sanskrit, you know?
yeah,
And,
yeah.
but again, because it matches the Vedic perspective, it's not highlighted. And so that's what I try and do. I mean, because when I first started, of course, everyone is probably familiar with P. N. Oak's work. And, you know, and he was an inspiration in the early days. But
Mm,
I found it's more helpful. It's more helpful, and it's actually unnecessary to use hyperbole or speculative points because the evidence is so undeniable. It's just ignored, right? So I can just go, you know, something as simple as the Hawaiian civilization, and we
mm,
have such an isolated culture. Yet
mm,
their chiefs are called the Ari'i, because R and L are the same, and it means the same thing, like Arya, noble. And then they have their four castes, and then they have their chief god is named Kane, right? And he
mm,
has, and he's dark complexioned, and his older brother is Kanaloa, and he's light complexioned, right?
mm,
And they have, yeah, and it just goes on, and they have all the exact archetypes of the Krishna Balaram,
mm,
and always he has his everywhere you go he has his eagle. Yet in Hawaii it's too isolated for eagles, but they do have a small hawk species there. But what
mm,
did the Hawaiians tradition have for their bird of the great supreme god Kane is the grand albatross. It's like the biggest bird in the Pacific Ocean, big as an eagle, you know. And so everywhere you go, you keep finding this archetype. And if there's a place without snakes, like Hawaii, then it's all fulfilled by the momo, which is the lizards, right? And so, and then if you go down to the Olu tradition of the in Nigeria, the Benin culture, again, that's another culture was completely almost wiped out and destroyed. But it's an example of high civilization, high African civilization. And there's so many Vedic elements, even to the point where there's so-called scarring on their forehead is the Vaishnav tilak. I don't know if you've
mm,
seen those ancient Benin statues. And then
mm,
if you look at their creator god, he's always associated. That's the other thing. All these creator gods, whether it's Wakan Tanka or Olu of Nigeria, they're always associated with the serpent, the eagle, and the color blue, right? And so
mm,
we keep finding this archetype everywhere. And so
mm,
the History Channel keeps pushing the theory. They don't deny any of this. They
mm.
just say, oh, it's because aliens came and forced this upon humanity. So which is more logical, you know, or reptilians from another planet came and forced it on
Yeah.
humanity. So whose theory is more logical? Our Vedic Hindu traditional perspectives or these crazy modern alien theory
Alien
perspectives?
theory, yeah.
So I'll go with science and tradition, you know,
Yeah.
in a living tradition, as you say.
Yeah, here we have one Professor C.S.R. Prabhu, who is also coming up with this kind of a hypothesis and theory. He
Oh
calls
wow,
it Dharma Yoga theory, and
wow,
he is very much excited to share all these views with everyone. That it
wow,
was all there all over the world. It was all Vedic culture. But
yeah.
the kind of evidences that you are bringing from Nigeria and other parts, probably he's not aware. He'll be definitely excited to hear this conversation
Oh,
from us.
okay, cool.
Uh,
No, that's
yeah,
great.
yeah,
Yeah, because that's what I find too. Is I love the interconnectivity that I've gotten so much empowerment and inspiration ever since I first started going to Vedic conferences from your people, your community, your culture, and yeah, it's great to hear about it. What's his name?
CSR Prabhu. He is a computer scientist by
Wow,
profession. He was the Director General of National Informatics Center, Government of India.
wow,
But a highly learned man in Sanskrit, and his PhD he did in object knowledge model, which is a semantic search engine model for web designing, web search. Uh,
yeah.
But he nowadays spends more time on Indic studies, and he has come up with this theory. He actually traveled to Egypt and places like that, and that was his starting point. He started finding everything to be very similar, and everything having origins in the Vedic culture and all that. After his return from the tour, he wrote this book.
The evidence is undeniable and it's just ignored.
Mm,
And a great example is ancient Babylon,
mm,
and the world's leading expert on ancient Babylonian religion directly, I even have it on video, and he directly says, if you want to experience ancient Babylonian religion as it was practiced thousands of years ago, you need to go to Jagannath Puri in the modern state of Odisha in India, used to be called Orissa.
yes.
And this is the world's leading expert on Babylonian religion saying this, right?
Mm,
And it's not just some, they're on a procession. There's
mm,
too many parallels. It's not just the procession. It's the role of the king. The role of the king is the sweeper. There's just too many parallels where the
mm,
professor exactly says, he says
mm,
either the people of India brought this tradition from Babylon, or in ancient times, tradition was brought from India to Babylon. And people don't know because right now Orissa is the sandbars have built up over the centuries. But
mm,
if you traveled back in time, Orissa was one of the largest seaports on the planet. I think it
mm,
was the Kalinga Empire, and they
mm,
had ships. They even have carvings of giraffes in their
mm,
temples in Orissa still,
mm,
and to exact model, not these weird heard about it, but actually seen.
mm,
And so Orissa was a major seaport. You traveled to Rome, Greece, Japan, China, and that's not even deniable. Again, it's just ignored. And
yeah.
so, yeah, and so what we're dealing with, and this is another really important point, and hopefully there's a lot of younger listeners who could take this to heart, is basically there's always the sense, like I'm an American, even though I was raised in your culture, but all my family members are Americans, and so actually symbiosis, I think it's called. I naturally developed a sense of pride and comfort with my American identity and culture, even though I'm outraged at the genocide at its roots. But still, there's a sense of, like I remember when I traveled to Germany, my friend got in trouble because he painted his house the wrong color. Like that's unheard of in America, except in a private community.
Mm,
And then people like right now, even in COVID time, I could go take my drum and start chanting Hare Krishna at any public area in this country. That's my rights. So I see what's beautiful about this country, and but that's like a mundane identity, because one life I can be this American, another life, Zambian, whatever. So that's called the flag waving. So some people wave the flag. I'm a Jew, I'm a Hindu, I'm a Christian, I'm a Muslim. But in terms of their heart, they're not really practicing that tradition. They're not following what it means to be a true Hindu or Christian, etc. And so it's important to find that balance where you have pride, a healthy pride and confidence in your tradition, your country, your culture, right? But
yes.
with your Hindu civilization, you have to look at it's even deeper than that. So,
Mm,
for example, if all, like you talked about, all the ecological environmental benefits built into indigenous cultures and civilizations, like a lot of that is only being rediscovered, revived now, as people realize, like, God, we destroyed so many ancient cultures and now we're paying the price. And so what you have in your Hindu civilization is a functioning, unbroken tradition going back thousands of years. I mean, literally, people were there in the Ganges doing puja before the pyramids were built, right?
yeah.
So you have this tradition going on unbroken, and inbuilt within those traditions are solutions to problems. Not
Yes.
just, of course, we can look at it from a spiritual sense, God helps all, but also let's look at it from a technical sense. So if we have an ancient civilization that's been here thousands of years, look at how many situations they've had to deal with, whether it's plagues, invasion, hostile takeovers, inter fratricidal warfare, famines, animal husbandry, health issues, educational systems. So when you have an ancient system that's still going on from ancient times to pre-recorded history up to this very moment, that is an obvious sign of functionality.
Mm.
Okay. So when you have something that is carried on for so long, that's an obvious sign of functionality. That means it has value that's beneficial to all humanity. And like gold, even if I have, the most beautiful gold jewelry, if I drop it in a dirty, muddy place, naturally that gold will also become covered with mud and unrecognizable. Its natural beauty will be covered. So after thousands of years, baggage builds up, issues builds up. And that's why Krishna says every time there's a decline in religion or dharma, he doesn't say religion, he says dharma,
Mm.
I descend myself to put things back in balance. So that's the natural process of this world. And so what we have today is these unscrupulous uh, people with following an unscrupulous agenda. They will highlight the baggage that's come along after thousands of years within your culture and artificially highlight that as the true face of your culture in order to discredit the true actual benefit of your culture. So, so it's so important to not be in ignorance and say, yes, they have a caste issue problem, right? But if we look at like the caste issue, that's an example of Hindus not following their own tradition because Krishna says Chatur Varnam Maya Shrishta Guna Karma Svabhagasha. So
Mm.
what is he saying? He's saying these four divisions of society are based on guna, character, and karma, action. Nowhere does he say janma or jati, right?
Yes.
And so we look and we see people not following the true Hindu way, not following their leader, Krishna, not following their scripture, the Gita. And so all these problems develop. And then the opposition is able to hammer away at your people and culture based on that error within the society.
Mm.
Whereas all the beautiful aspects of your society are intentionally undermined. Like it blew my mind how when the cow protection movement started picking up after Modi was elected, and the Western media, which is always harping on PETA and saving animals and indigenous cultures, was completely demonizing the cow activists in India as cow vigilantes
Yeah.
and not once did I see the Hindu community rise up and say, hey, we are a prime example, the best living example of a harmonious human environmental relationship. Don't demonize us. Maybe we're overly excited about it, but you could have the same complaints about the Black Lives Matter activists burning down the store a few miles from me here too. So are we
Yeah.
going to say Black lives shouldn't
There is
matter
some
anymore?
reaction. For example, PETA people, this PETA,
Yeah.
PETA people, they were on social media. There was a lot of war of words between the cow protection people and the PETA people. The cow protection people said, when you are animal protectors, so why are you demonizing us? If
Yeah.
you're really animal protecting people, you should not demonize us.
Yeah. What did they say? No reply.
They started pointing out that the Gaushala-s were not well maintained and cows were not being looked after well. They gave some
So
examples.
were those their examples before they were called out, or that was their cover story?
Yeah, see, the it is changing the goalpost.
Exactly.
First you demonize cow protectors, and then if the cow protectors say we are also like you, then you say that you are not rightly protecting. You are not protecting well. Your Gaushalas are not well maintained.
The sad news is PETA is part of the conspiracy to destroy humanity's natural relationship with the animals, right? It's like such a perfect arrangement, you know. And I'm living here, seeing the benefit of these animals. Like, not only do we have the cows, we have a huge organic farm, and we do buy some, what do you call that? Like dry tree bark and all that, just to add to the soil, and dry leaves. But a majority of our garden bed is from the cows. You know, it's like, and look at it from an economic perspective, how much we're saving. They eat grass, and then we use their dung to grow food. You know.
Yeah,
So
and some of these Gaushalas, they are sheltering the abundant cows, and when the abundant cow comes to the Gaushala, by that time already the cow is weak and the bones are looking and all that. And these
so
people take pictures of those cows and say that, see, you did not maintain that. That cow is a new entrant into the Goshala. It was not
yeah,
looked after by
exactly.
the owners, original owners. For the Goshala, it takes time to revive the health of that cow. At least 1 or 2 years, it has to be looked after well. Some whatever health issues it has developed, because some of these cows are old also. Because of aging, also they have developed some health issues.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, that's part of the world. We have such a well-run farm here. And like a couple months ago, one of our young bulls died, right? And he just had some internal, condition he was born with. Yeah, so I'm curious to know, because nowadays I'm not, I'm not traveling to India as much, and I don't have firsthand experience. But I'm curious to know, like, how is the general trend amongst the Hindu community in India now in this past 5 years under Modi's prime ministership? Is there a sense of, are we going from strength to strength, or are people starting to like get tired, or what's going on your side?
Actually, my view generally is that government has a very small role to play in these things. Uh,
Yeah,
cultural aspects are very much independent of law, government, state, and governance, and all that. Okay, one probably sense of that one person who is in favor of our culture has come to power could be there, but also there is a general awareness, and also, as you said, this janma kind of thing has gone, guna and karma have come into play. Many people are learning, say, for example, Lalita Sahasranamas or Vishnu Sahasranamas in
yeah,
temples. They are reciting, they are doing pujas, and there is a lot of interest in Sanskrit, irrespective of caste, gender, and all these things. People are learning Sanskrit. And part of it goes to even governmental role in terms of, for example, offering Sanskrit Vedas to all people coming from all castes and genders and all that also.
oh,
But
nice.
these movements like Samskrita Bharati from
Yeah,
RSS, spreading Sanskrit, and there again, no caste, no gender, no age. Uh, so everyone is picking that up. And Goshalas are also, actually, I don't think they have got to do with the government or party or something like that. A general interest in cows and animal protection and all that
yeah,
is picking up. And some of these ISKCON inspired Goshalas have come up. And I know a friend and student of mine who has established a Goshala here. It is so well maintained that
wow. What part of India are you?
Hyderabad, it is part of
Hyderabad.
Telangana. It is
Nice.
the capital city of Hyderabad, Telangana.
Yeah, yeah, I've been
Yeah,
there, I guess, 3 times.
he's a Gaudiya Vaishnava. He started a Gaudiya Vaishnava Goshala. And
Right.
now there are, he says that he is getting cows almost every few days. People bring their cows and hand it over to him. He is getting overpowered. In fact, actually, it is becoming
Oh, wow.
a burden to him. So many calls are coming.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Not because one thing, bringing it back to American history is, as you know, after Columbus came, and rather than that's another thing I could start a whole nother lecture on. But basically, we still call like the American Indians, like for years they've been trying to say Native Americans, but if you go to the actual tribal people, they still call themselves and like to call themselves Indians, and so basically the they were undefeated. They were getting wiped out slowly. But then the Plains Indians, the Sioux
Mm,
and the Cheyenne in particular, they were two. They actually defeated the U.S. and just got to kick the Americans out of their sacred Black Hills, and were victorious militarily. Had the treaties rescinded, had burned the forts down, and it was legally accepted. Okay, this is your land, right? And so they couldn't be defeated. And so what was the strategy used? And I actually found the document, and I got to research, and I should write about this. The US government recognized that as long as the indigenous people of America
mm,
had the buffalo, the bison to rely on, then
mm,
they would remain independent, self-sufficient, and undefeatable. And
mm,
so what did the Americans do? They immediately declared war on the bison, and they brought the bison population down, I think within less than a year, from 60 million down to
mm,
like 1,500 surviving bison. And that was when the Native American civilization was once and for all destroyed, after their connection with their bison, which is basically the American, bovine species,
mm,
that was disconnected. That's when they were finished. That's when they lost everything. And so, just imagine. I remember, this is another thing. I remember as a kid in 1976, actually, I saw this documentary, and they was showing how UN had done this tractor project and given free tractors to farmers all over India. And it collapsed like within weeks because the farmers needed petrol and they needed money to buy petrol for their tractors. And so the farmers understood that actually our traditional system of oxen and cows is more reliant and self-sufficient, and we don't need anyone, and we could keep just doing this. Maybe we don't have a fancy car or a refrigerator. And so this vital link to self-sufficiency and independence is in the form of the cow, right? And we
mm.
can look at the template. Everything that happened in our country here in the US is happening in your country of India today.
Yes.
And the big problem for the opposition is your population. And I don't know if you know about that infamous quote of Winston Churchill. And he's
Mm,
like, oh, I should just send those bombers there. It's those bloody Hindus, and they populate like rabbits, some complaint like that. And he was directly saying, is like, there's so many Hindus, we can't defeat them, we can't conquer them, right? And that's why I'm against all this overpopulation theories, right? Like Gandhi said, there's more than enough for man's needs in this world, but not mankind's greed, right? And then if you look at it scientifically, they 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 waste enough food every year, I think, just in America to feed like billions of people, right? And if you take the amount of food and water it takes to make a hamburger, right, you could use that same land and water to grow food and feed like 100 people bread, right? So, so again, the ancient system, it's self-reliance, self-sustainability, independence built into your culture and system, right? And it might not seem cool and hip and sexy and all that, but it's survival. And when you're young, people, like I was there too, and it matters what people think about how you look, all that. It's important. I understand that helps with image. But in the long term, after you become a parent, you start seeing the impact on generations. Like I can see the world as it was 20 years ago, 40 years ago, see the differences. right? And then you start seeing your social responsibility, not just for your immediate time frame, but for the next generation and then the next generation. And so like the American Indians, they have this saying, everything you do, always think 7th-generation impact ahead, right? And so the cow protection is vital to that 7th-generation sustainability ahead.
Yeah.
Because I found that a majority of people in the world are good-hearted and they just don't have enough information to make the right decisions. They're like fence sitters. So the thing is information is so important, and the more we can get it out to the neutral people, it's always fine preaching to the choir, inspiring each other is great. But if we can find more and more platforms where we connect to your average person who's just going about life and is just not informed, doesn't have enough information to make the proper decisions, our primary goal should be to reach those people. And so I think one of the reasons a lot of my former ISKCON associates and people like that, they don't really appreciate my work, is because like if you look at my website, I'm not one of those guys who will have like pictures of Radha Krishna everywhere and Hindu temples and all that, because immediately people will say, oh, this guy's a staunch Hindu, I'm not into Hinduism. But if I have a page that's like, no, this is an ancient universal tradition, you are all part of it. Look at this American Indian scholar says, look what this Christian scholar says, look what Darashiko has to say, and then I create this universal template where people can, slowly but surely feel comfortable to associate with it and be part of it. And so I found like I just, on a practical level, my mom, the last 2 years, there's the last dairy in the state of Hawaii shut down, and all the dairy cows are being sent to the slaughterhouse. And so my mom started she actually was about to retire to her apartment in Vrindavan and sell everything. But instead she canceled all that, and she dedicated her life to rescuing all these dairy cows. And it took 2 years, and just yesterday, she sent out a message saying they finally rescued all of them. And a majority, even though my mom's a straight up, Krishna devotee, and she's always saying, oh, this is Krishna taught us this. But if you look at a majority of the people who helped support her project, I'd say 90% of them are just average Americans, who are into vegetarianism and animal rights, like that. And then, but what they're seeing is like, wow, this Krishna devotee went out of her way and rescued all these cows and put her own comfort and life on the line, right, to do this, right? And so guaranteed all those people before that had no interest in Vedic culture, Hinduism, or Krishna consciousness. Now all of them are looking to my mom as this great champion and person to respect and listen to, right? And so we need to find more and more avenues like this. And because the opposition is expert at isolating us, compartmentalizing us, breaking us into parts. So even like when I try and run Facebook promotions, and I'll specifically choose certain regions of the world, they will decide, oh, this looks like it will appeal to ethnic Indian Hindus. And so suddenly my thing's only being directed to Indian Hindus, even though I want the whole world and anyone interested in any indigenous culture, right? So so it's something we need to seriously consider, how to reach and bridge that gap to good people who just need more information to support us.
Okay. How far did your website come? Is it now ready to be viewed?
Yeah, it's been going for about 2 months, and it's brannonparker.com. And so yeah, it's ready there, and I want to add more features, and I just want it to be a resource that people can access like that.
That's
But
really
I do
great.
find
Actually, that perspective that you are giving, that universal perspective, and that global perspective that you are giving through your website, that definitely is going to work. And I think that is the future. That is going to be the future. Gradually, the whole world is going to realize that, and more indigenous cultures are coming up, and
Yeah, it's our
As you
heritage,
know, at
common
Indian
heritage.
Academy now we started a center for polytheistic and indigenous cultures with Edward.
Hmm. Yeah,
Uh,
because that's like another issue that comes up is because, like, I don't know if you know Phil Goldberg. He's like an American author, and he wrote a few books, but one of them's called American Veda, and he's
mm,
a follower of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And from this, he's been a follower since the '60s, like lifelong, and he's probably one of America's leading scholars, authors on the history of impact of Hinduism and Vedic culture in America. And so I helped arrange a tour when Penguin Books released the Indian edition of American Veda with Ram
mm,
Madhava. I helped arrange a tour of India with him. And we were both shocked because the biggest obstacle was the mistrust people had that he was an evangelical agent,
mm,
right? And he was shocked because he's from a Jewish background, has no connection to Christianity in his life practice or anything. And then when he was like in his early 20s, he became a follower of Maharishi and never looked back, right?
mm,
And
mm,
everywhere he went, he kept, instead of people being elated about this gentleman from America sharing the great news of the wonderful impact of Hinduism on America, they just
mm,
kept attacking, not attacking, but questioning his credibility and as a potential, Catholic Vatican agent or something, right?
mm,
And so, and I understand, even to this day, it's weaponized and being used against Hindu Dharma, but we definitely need to separate, like I have one scholar I consider like my Shiksha guru, and he said the problem is these Christians, no matter how devout they are, no matter how much faith they have no ability to recognize their own God within the
mm,
indigenous religions of the world. They can't
mm,
recognize their God when they look at Krishna.
mm,
They can't. So the problem's on them, right? That doesn't mean that um, the traditions are wrong. The tradition's the problem. It's them. So, for example, a blunt example is I could take my car and go drive to the market and pick up some groceries, or I could take my car like a maniac and start driving
yeah.
on the sidewalks, right? But so someone could say, oh my God, cars are just so bad. No, the driver's so bad, So we need to really separate people who have abused um, these Abrahamic traditions and from the actual core tradition, right?
Yeah.
And then the other, and we need to make alliances with good-hearted people. And I can't hammer away the point enough that the template of what's happening in India happened to all the indigenous cultures of the world. And you'll be surprised to hear where did it first happen in terms of our last few hundred years was Britain. The first indigenous history that I know of that was suppressed by these same forces suppressing Indian history was the real British history. After the
Mm,
Normans came over to Britain, they completely went on a campaign to disconnect the indigenous people from their true history, their true religions, their true cultures. And that same template is being done in India today. And so
correct.
that's like what you pointed out a few times, this rise of pagan and polytheistic traditions, because they're also early victims of the same process that happened to all the American Indians and to the Hindus today. And then I keep talking here, forgive me, but I'd like, if I don't say it, I'll forget the point. It's so important. But going back to the roots of Hindu or Vedic civilization, a few years ago, I found this report from the government of Vietnam, and this was their archaeological department, top archaeologists, scholars of Vietnamese history and culture, and they found a 4,000-year-old Vishnu head, like deity, over 4,000-year-old, dated by them, right? And this is Vishnu, Vaishnava, 4,000-year-old culture in Vietnam. And again,
Mm,
I'm bringing that up to show you the universality
mm,
combined with the undeniability,
mm,
combined with the intentional dismissing, or not dismissing, they just pretend it doesn't exist because dismissing it recognizes it, right? So these three processes are the biggest obstacles to our understanding of this universality of Vedic Dharma. It's just undeniable. And so my life goal is to just keep hammering away, putting out little pieces of evidence. And I could say I'm very grateful to actually Shobit Maturji, because back in the early 2000s, one of my first published papers was a paper, Indo-Coptic Hellenic Nexus, which is Indian, Egyptian, Greek nexus, just showing the undeniable similarities in their cultures. And so I was started from there. Not started from there, that was a big boost that I got. And so I'm finding that the universality of the culture is undeniable. Yet, as I'm going and rediscovering my research, it's very gratifying for me that I'm finding other scholars who will directly, like I saw this web forum called Tamil Brahmins the other day, and they found an old article of mine about Vedic Brahma and the Apache Red Indian Katuristan, and it's like exact parallel, right? And they're right on there. They're like, because my devotee named Vrindavan Parker, so I used to go by Vrind Parker. They're like, oh, praising my work, you know? And I'm like, wow, thank you, Brahmins. And then I'll find other scholars and they're saying, wow, it's great. This guy, Vrind Parker, was first clued me onto this. And I'm not saying this just to praise myself, but as a reminder to myself of the value of steadily, quietly hammering away at something. Just quietly, you know. My name's not up on the billboards on Times Square, but the impact is there, you know.
Definitely. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Brannon. On that note, actually, now all youngsters who are going to listen to this podcast, they're definitely going to get inspired from your long experience and wide understanding and deeper experience with not only India and global cultures, and presenting Hinduism as the only surviving indigenous culture as a template, universal template for the indigenous cultures to revive in the world.
Yes, an accessible, living, universally applicable template is there for the whole world. Once all this crisis is done over the next 5 years, we can start implementing all these solutions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and then I just wanted to, my website is brannonparker.com, BRANNON Parker.com. And the reason I chose just my name is because I've written on a vast variety of topics. So if I just chose some history name, it wouldn't cover my political side of work, etc. So Brannon Parker just says it all. I wrote it. It's something I did. There it is. It's on my website. Simple, you know. So yeah, and it's a preliminary website. I'll just keep plugging away at it, getting information there. And I want to close with this because from my understanding, you said there's a lot of students, younger generation people, right, listening.
Yes.
So I would like to just say something. This is important because over the years, there's been this pattern where when we do have Westerners or non-Indians, quote unquote, converting or adopting Hindu culture, there's this generalization that those type of people were failures or losers in their own Western culture. And so because they're such losers and have no place in their society, they had to adopt and find some other alternate identity. Maybe that's the case for a few people, but I can tell you a majority of people that have adopted Hindu ways are usually successful people who are successful materially or socially, and they found that they still lack something in their life, despite having the best of what supposedly the world has to offer. You know, all these slick, sexy TV shows and Hollywood films, like, yeah, if you got this, then you are a success. I'm talking about most of those people recognize they're not happy still, right? And that's why they get into Hindu Dharma, Buddha Dharma, meditation, vegetarianism, all these things that are no-brainers for your everyday practicing Hindu. And to make it even more personal, I can give you an example of my own life. So after 14, I tried to just become a normal American, and I never forgot Prabhupada and my understanding of who he was and what he represented to me in the world. Before the COVID, I could go to Honolulu and choose the best venues, the best clubs, and immediately they go, oh, it's that Vedic guy, because they know if I do an event, people are going to come, right? And so I had the University of Hawaii funding my events, and we had DJs and all the themes. Like we had, a Hanuman's Tale was the name of one of our events. Another one was the Night of Bali. Another one was Universal Form. Another one was Buddha's birthday. And of course, we'd have DJs, and we'd always hire the most popular local bands and DJs. And then people would come and they'd go, oh, I love that DJ. And then they'd show up and there'd be like a traditional Buddhist monk doing some ceremony, right? Or there would be like a Vedic storyteller telling the story of Krishna, or we'll have Bharatanatyam dancers. And so basically and that's why it's no accident Hawaii was the first state with a Hindu government representative, because me and my friends, we reached the peak of mainstream hip cool society, and we presented your culture in a pragmatic, exciting way. And we were like popular, making money, successful. I even ran for office, and I was elected to the local Honolulu City, Waikiki City Council. So why I'm telling you is I'm not one of these people who was like brainwashed as a kid to be a Hindu and never made it in the American society, and now I'm still clinging onto no, I had the best of both worlds, and I recognized what is best of what I got. And what I got from Prabhupada, which he continually and repeatedly credited to your culture, to your nation, to your people, is the best of what this world has to offer. And I'm grateful to all of you, and I humbly beg you, do not forego your legacy. Be successful materially, but find balance, and do not forego your spiritual traditions, your indigenous cultures and legacies. And lo and behold, you will find, if you harness those technologies, those ancient ways, you will find your material life and success will reach the greatest pinnacles possible. And any problems, because this world is full of problems, you will find yourself with the cohesive cognizance and awareness to handle any difficulties in the most suitable manner. So that's my humble request. Recognize your heritage.
Great message. So it was a great conclusion. It was a great concluding note. Thank you very much. Namaste.
Namaste. Yeah. Thank you, Nagaraj.
shravaNa will be definitely a very good shravaNa, and manana and nitidhyasa, which follow this, definitely help all the youngsters. Thank you very
much. You've been listening to shravaNa, the Rashtram podcast. We hope that you enjoyed the conversation. Watch this space, subscribe to our channel, like it and share it with your family and friends, and comment on our content to let us know what you think. Follow Rashtram on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at RashtramSBL. Visit rashtram.org for more.